Okay, so we're going to jump into Genesis 4, 5, and 6. And we've just come out of the creation story. We've had that wonderful creation story in Genesis 1 and then into Genesis 2, talking about the nearness of God. He's the great creator in Genesis 1 and the near God in 2. And then we have the fall of man. And now we're stepping into this part where sin doesn't just enter to two people's lives, it starts to pervade all of creation. And we see this even in the lives of their children and their sons. And that's really the main point, is we're going to see over the next couple of chapters how bad things get when people continue to make choices and live in their own ways. Again, Genesis is primarily a historical narrative, which means that it's not a morality descriptor. A lot of things happen that probably shouldn't. We're going to start to see things like polygamy or other things that come up. And those things aren't commented on here about whether they're right or wrong. What is commented on is what is going on and exactly how that drives this story forward of sin and redemption. And so again, we're just going to be looking at many complex issues. First off, we're going to hit murder, and then revenge, prostitution, lying, deception, rape, slavery, polygamy here in the book of Genesis. Again, many of these things aren't even resolved, let alone commented on. And so again, the major point is that humanity is regularly disconnecting from God, disconnecting from themselves and each other. And we're going to see that thread as we talk about what holiness and righteousness are, staying right with God in obedience with Him, being holy and set apart for Him, and then also righteous, being just, being able to interact with other people in the right way. So those are kind of some of the major themes that will be coming up. As we start out, I'm going to start reading Genesis 4:1. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. So immediately we see here that Adam and Eve go about multiplying like they're supposed to, as they've been given the blessing to do. Cain is conceived and born after the fall. And she says here that I conceived and bore him. I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord. So she does attribute God with the one helping her. Cain's name might be really similar to the word gotten. A lot of these names will kind of point out a little bits about them because the names all had meaning. Some of the meanings are a little hard to know because this is such an ancient text. It's hard to go back that far and know exactly what the languages are meaning. There's not a lot of written record from that time. Okay, there's none that we can compare against those kinds of things. Again, this is a really old text, and it's probably being written in the time of Moses. And so at that time, there was other written texts and things. But again, we don't even have the originals of these. These are all copies and those types of things. But we know the Bible is accurate and authoritative for our lives. Again, but here we just see that these names have meaning to them. Sometimes it's simple meanings like this one, gotten. She's gotten this man with the help of the Lord. And this is the first child being born. It's got to be a surprise whether it's a boy or a girl and how that's going to work. And then we have Abel, who's also being born in this. And there's going to be a comment about them having two different roles. Abel is a keeper of sheep and Cain is a worker of the ground. The name Abel has no concrete origin that I could find, and I was reading a number of commentaries on this. He never speaks in any of these chapters and has a brief place in the narrative as the murdered brother. So this is not a long, extensive story about Abel. The story pretty much revolves around Cain and sin, which is kind of the sad part of the story. But it's making a point about human frailty and human corruption. So Cain follows Adam as a worker of the ground, and Abel keeps the flocks, which indicates that there's probably early domesticated animals already, and probably as a worker of the ground, also domesticated agricultures. So grains, things like that, or other types of agricultures that might be done. So they had particular food sources. And to get those food sources, they had to cultivate them. They weren't out hunting. They weren't out doing other things. They had to cultivate them. And it does not say here that they were eating the animals. Early on in Genesis 1, we actually see that they were told to eat the vegetation. All animals and the humans were told to eat vegetation. And we don't know if that's changed with the fall or not. They might still be vegetarian. In the ancient times, people were known to keep sheep and other flocks and not eat the meat. They would do it for the milk and the wool and the skins and other parts of the animal than just eating them. And we see that even today in certain regions of the world. It's very expensive to eat meat, right? That's something we all know. But having milk and all the byproducts of raising animals. So that's how the story starts. We're not told everything, but we do get the sense that they're cultivating animals and food. We know this is difficult because of the curse. They're going to have to work very hard. And we'll see that kind of come up again as we hit into some of the further generations. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and the fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offspring, but for Cain and his offspring he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must rule over it." And this sounds like a very fatherly conversation. I mean, it could be with grown adults or with children age, maybe a teenager even. You could see this kind of conversation. If you do what's good, you're going to be accepted. And if you don't, you're not going to get, basically we would say a gold star on the chart, And so this is the kind of conversation that we're seeing happen. Again, it's very interesting that even post-fall, they're having conversations with God. And I know that's difficult for us to kind of understand in our day and age at times. Like a lot of people have trouble, they say, I have trouble hearing God, or I don't even know that God exists or is speaking, but they're still having this very intimate conversations with God. And it seems like he's helping direct them and give them guidance on how to live. So the offerings here could be different kinds. It just says they're mina in the Hebrew. And so it doesn't actually specify. In Leviticus, there were two types of offerings. There were both grain offerings and there were animal offerings. And so it's not explicit in this text of why Cain's offering is being rejected. That's actually not known. Again, the grain offerings in Leviticus were to honor God. And the surrounding cultures would understand that as well, because they would pay tributes to their kings or overlords. Anytime you gave a grain offering or meat offering, it was a sign of respect and honor. So again, there's nothing specific here that we can pick out and say, oh, they could only offer animals or only offer plants. We're not actually told enough in this story exactly why the offering is being refused. Some people have posited or proposed different things, like possibly he didn't bring the right kind of fruit and vegetable, or maybe he was supposed to bring an animal. Again, it's not completely known. Abel's offering it doesn't seem like it was the blood portion. Maybe it could have been, but he says he offered the fat portion, which typically is not the atonement kind of offering. That's just being said, again, because typically you would need blood to sprinkle on a temple or an altar. We're not told there's a temple or an altar here either. Again, it's not completely clear the whole sacrificial system and worship system that's been set up. But obviously they know what should be done, or at least are being told what should be done as they're going about doing this. And they have ways to please God and ways not to. And he's kind of giving them feedback on that. And the point is, Cain has the ability. God's like, well, do it different next time. So he doesn't, it's not like there's a curse or there's a punishment involved here. Again, Cain's offering is not accepted. Maybe because, and I put several maybes, maybe it's not fat, maybe it's not first fruit, maybe it's an attitude that Cain came with, maybe, right? Like there's no clear thing, but something wasn't right. And that's up to God. He gets to determine what's good and acceptable. Again, love the point that it's face-to-face meeting. Cain's warned then that sin is going to be crouching at his door. And so there's this whole issue with sin. And so Cain and Abel, they're not getting a fresh start Adam and Eve had. They're going to have to deal with sin in a different way. And this idea of sin crouching at the door could be understood at that time as possibly like more of a demonic force crouching at a door. That was kind of known in Mesopotamia and other areas, that sometimes demons were thought to linger around doorways. So this kind of gives you a picture that maybe this wasn't just sin, but sin personified as a force that was about to strike Cain. And Cain has a choice. He can either continue pursuing a relationship under God's boundaries and methods, or he can do something else. So we see in verse 8, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in a field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on earth. So we start off here. These are pretty simple statements that we start with, that Cain obviously is angry. He has his brother out in the field and he kills him. Like that is a pretty serious amount of jealousy and rage. And then God comes and starts again with a question. He does the same thing when he addresses Adam and Eve. He gives them a chance to tell their side of the story. He asks this question. He has this interaction, and says, well, what's going on here? Well, in the case of Adam and Eve, he asks Eve, or Adam, what happened? He's like, well, she gave me the food to eat. And then she says, oh, the serpent did it. So there's this blame shifting. Cain just flat out lies. He says, I don't know what happened to my brother. So when God confronts him with a question, tell me your side of the story, what's going on? And then we have Cain continuing to not only deny responsibility, he says, am I my brother's keeper? Where we know what the word keeper means, because Adam's original responsibility was to be a keeper of the garden. And so Cain understands this word, that he's to, take care of things, and instead he's become destructive. And so as we see, he's now refused responsibility. He hasn't repented. He hasn't come clean. And so God knows everything that's happened. And I don't know if Cain understood that or not, but now there's going to be repercussions. And the soil is the source of Cain's former livelihood, is depicted as physically grieving after an unwanted drink of Abel's blood. And so we just see that this is now going to cause trouble with the ground. Cain is cursed like the ground and the serpent, right? I said Adam and Eve weren't cursed directly. They had a lot of repercussions of curses and things, but Cain is directly cursed like the ground and the serpent. This is an additional ground curse. So now the ground is cursed twice. And this means Cain is no longer going to be a farmer, but a nomad, and he's going to have to forage for food. So this is going to make his life incredibly difficult. So as Adam was removed from the garden, so Cain will be removed even further. And we see him being moved off yet again, even further outside of the area. So we get the sense that maybe Adam is in, maybe the land right outside the garden and is able to do agriculture there almost immediately. But then now Cain is going to end up what we would consider in the wilderness or something like that, in a further place. So Cain is going to be in even worse land than where they've been. So then Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So again, Cain realizes that his life's already hard, having to do agriculture, right? These are the first people. They don't have big combine machines and special seeds that bear tons of fruit. Like they're starting from nothing. They don't have, decades of knowledge or any of that kind of thing going into this. They're really having to start. I mean, we don't even know if they're having to dig irrigation and all the other things that come with this. So God is gracious when all of this happens with Adam and Eve. He gives them skins. And here he's going to show grace by marking Cain. Because as Cain goes out, number one, the food's going to be hard, but also Cain realizes his whole family's going to want to kill him. Whenever they come across him, even in the future, they're going to want to kill him because of what he did to Abel. And so again, this idea of a mark on Cain that God puts on Cain is not completely clear. It could mean a sign to Cain or for Cain. The idea of demarcating a land area for a manslayer, moving Cain to a new city is kind of the idea of marking him out, giving him a different territory can even be the idea of this word. And we see this happens later, that God says, set aside cities for manslayers. And so we're seeing this with Cain, a place where avengers don't go, and kind of setting a boundary line saying, why don't you go over there, start a new place and a new thing, and then the people that want to kill you won't be able to. And so we see that as kind of a marked boundary on Cain's life. They're going to have a physical distance between him and his family, and he's going to have to go start over. So again, this is not really a narrative that's supposed to tell us about how to sacrifice properly. It's really it's about this dialogue that God's having at this point. Again, this chapter is really highlighting this twofold blessing that's still available but difficult, right? Eve has done exactly what she was supposed to do with bringing forth the blessing of multiplying, having children. They're not getting along. There's murder. There's food issues. Abel and Cain are both bringing sacrifice, but sin is actually the problem that's going to just be this underlying thread through this whole section. It's not just the food or the multiplication issues, right? You multiply, but then they kill each other, or you try to get food and then you do something and the ground gets cursed in. It's even harder. So again, that's not really the point. The point is that sin is pervading the human heart, and it's starting to, it's going on into new generations. They don't grow up as innocent children and stay innocent, right? They grow up and they sin too. And so again, we're going to see this as the first sin being discussed here, even after the fall, is murder. I mean, this is on the extreme end. And so we just see that happening. So what was going on with the whole hearts and everything? Well, we know that Cain had brought a sacrifice and had been rejected. He was really looking for acceptance and attention of God, which ultimately led to jealousy. And through his actions, he ends up being removed from the place of acceptance. I mean, he even says as much in his statements to God, like, I will be hidden from your face. Like, he's realizing that sin means more separation. It means more separation from his family and distance. It means separation from God. He's going to be alone, or he obviously takes a wife with him because he ends up with a family. But we have this issue of wanting to be in family and in relationship, but sin keeps breaking that. And even though he doesn't, kill the rest of his family or anything like that, the murder of his brother is what's brought the separation in all those relationships. Again, he doesn't. We don't see him taking a responsibility right off or repenting. Again, we see in other places that forgiveness and reconciliation only happen once there's repentance. Here, that's not really talked about. It's actually just a brokenness. And again, Cain's sin is pretty extreme and causes pretty deep brokenness in the whole family and societal structure at this time. And so he moves off to this Far East place. Okay, so we're going to move into a little story on Cain. Again, his genealogy is rather short in Genesis. I'm going to read bits of the genealogies, but remember, all of Genesis is structured around these genealogies, the Toledots. And so we have that main sentence in most of these chapters or different passage settings, and they're going to give genealogies, and it's everything is very concerned about family and lineage. Cain's genealogy actually isn't going to go very far. We're going to have it, and then we're going to compare it against the other lineages, and that's about it. And then in the flood, it kind of ends, and we start all over. So again, there's no mention of where Cain finds his wife. He's kind of separated out into this own city off to the east. The best guess is that she would have been a sister or some other close relative. We know later on that in Leviticus and other places in the law, they're not to marry close relatives, but at this time they have perfect genetics and there's really not any other options. And so outside of the conjecture that it's probably one of his sisters or somehow related to him, cousins, grandchildren of Adam and Eve, something along those lines, it's probably a very close relative. So it says, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. And so he has a son, they build a city, and then the city gets populated. Again, we're not really sure what all these populations are, but it's very interesting. There's seven generations here that are going to be mentioned, and in Cain's line. And there's nothing particular about that, but this is important just because of where it's going. And so we have Cain is the first in this generations, and then we'll have Enoch, and then we'll have Irad, and then Medulla, and then Methuselah, and then Lamech, and then Zillah, and Ada. Oh, sorry. And then, so it just goes on to talk about this. But what starts to get interesting is in verse 20, he said that one of his great-great-great-grandsons was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So really the trades are going to be talked about here. So people that live in tents are usually considered like nomads. They follow their sheep around, those kinds of things. So people like that. And then it says that there was another person, and he was the father of all those who played the lyre and the pipe, so musical instruments. So they're building musical instruments, they're playing them, there's music. Also, we see that there's another person here in this lineage that was a forger of all the instruments of bronze and iron. And so these aren't instruments like musical instruments, but like instruments like tools. And so they're doing metallurgy, bronze and iron. And again, so we see all this stuff come within those first few generations after Cain. He really has this society being set up. They're showing that the blessing's still in effect, that the genealogies are going on, that it's not just stopping with Adam and Eve. They are being able to be fruitful and multiply. God has blessed the population growth. And other views of that ancient time period were that the gods were not happy with population growth and didn't like the noise of humans, and that's why they send the flood. But we actually see in the Bible that God does like humans. He does like the population growing, and he's given them this ability to reproduce. But as the population grows, so does sin. The curse is spreading, and in many cases, not the blessing. And so Cain has 7 generations listed here. Cain's in the land of Nod, setting up a city. We just see all this craftsmanship and things, and civilization really, agriculture is being talked about, and metalwork, and all these different pieces, music. So all the things that start to come in. And we do see that even in the names here, a number of them end in IAH or EL, which is showing that they have part of, they want to be with God. The JHEO starts, or the EL starts, include the name of God in their names. And so we're just seeing that quite a few of these names are theocentric around God and his name. And they affirm God's nature, that people are in the image of God and those types of things. And they're requesting a blessing from God by putting his name in there. And so again, we'll see a number of names that are not theophoric or centered around God, and like Adam, Eve, Abel, Seth, and Enoch. But again, we'll see on several occasions that names will be given meaning. So that's kind of a lot of what Cain's main genealogy is. Now I'm going to jump into verse 23, and we're going to look at Lamech for a minute, because there's a bit of a story here in Cain's genealogy. So Lamech says to his wives, this is the 6th generation from Cain. He says to Ada and Zillah, "Hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 7-fold. So basically, we just see here that there's another murder that's happened. And this is 6 generations out. And we're going to compare this, Cain's 6th generation, to Seth. So Seth is going to be another child born to Adam and Eve. Abel has already died. And so Seth will be of the promised line. Cain will not. And so we're going to see how they compare. Well, in the 6th generation of Cain's line, we're going to have Lamech, who kills someone. In Seth's line, we're going to have Enoch, who walks with God and gets taken up. And so we're going to see this contrast between these two lines, the one that has the promised seed coming from it. Again, it's not always the oldest. It's the one that's going to carry the promise. So the narrative here is all about Lamech and this murder. It's kind of a song that Lamech is singing. Some people take it very boastful. Other people take it as a very logical sentence. We have this. He is again. This is a main point of this is we're stopping to have a sin narrative again, to talk about how bad things are with the people. And so again, the humans are not going the right direction. Lamech, first off, here is a polygamist. He has 2 wives. Again, polygamy is not morally commented on at this point, but it's simply being recorded. It's never given in any of the rest of the Bible as God's best, and usually leads to discord in the family. Genesis 1 sets up monogamy of husbands and wives as the blessed and the first start. And polygamy in the Old Testament is regulated, but it's not forbidden in the Mosaic Law. And sometimes things in the Mosaic Law are regulated because he knows the hardness of their heart, right? Divorce is regulated, it's not prohibited, but he says it's still not best. And that's kind of the feeling you get in the Levitical law about polygamy. The king was not to have many wives, and a man was not to marry his sisters. And so was not to marry sisters, sorry. And so we see these as things that really are being commented on, like, don't do this. This is really bad. We'll even see in the stories in Genesis when they do marry sisters, it's really not good for the family structure. But there are some provisions for polygamy, like in Deuteronomy 25, 5 and 6. If a man needs to marry his brother's widow and he's already married, that is given as a provision. And also, the first wife is always given special rights as polygamy is regulated but not prohibited. In the New Testament, Paul gives some clear instructions that an elder of church could not be a polygamist, is not looked upon favorably at all in the New Testament. It's not just regulated. It's really something that is deeply troublesome. So again, Lamech is this first introduction to a very moral issue that Genesis is not going to comment on. It's part of the historical narrative. At this time, we're not told good or bad on his polygamy, but we are kind of getting a little bit of a lens on what's going on in his life. He seems to be appealing to some sort of justice system, as he gives us, Cain would have been avenged 7 times. I would be 7 times, 70 times avenged. And so again, he does not talk about like a city of refuge like Cain needed to go to. He's kind of appealing more to a justice system, saying, I can stay where I am possibly, but I really should have great justice here. Lamech makes it clear that he has not shed innocent blood like Cain. Cain killed Abel out of hate and vengeance, but Lamech says, this man wounded me and he struck me, saying, I didn't start, I wasn't the only one involved here. This wasn't just innocent blood. So Cain, again, should have far less vengeance against him, only 7. And I should have 7 times 70 because this is not first-degree murder. This was manslaughter in our terms today. And so that means there was no intent and those kinds of things. It was maybe you were attacked or something happened. But again, we'll see that even if it's manslaughter later on, manslaughter, didn't get the death penalty, but it did. Those people had to go to a city of refuge. So that way they wouldn't have been avenged by one of the family members. So the problem a little bit here is Lamech does seem to be boasting a bit about this, where Cain had taken exile to a city kind of as a stigma. And he says, God, this is too much for me to bear. Lamech seems to almost be making this a badge of honor, is kind of singing a song about it. We see how bad sin has now come to this head. And that's kind of the point of the narrative, that sin has gotten serious, that it's not God saying he's going to mark him and avenge him. It's Lamech saying that this is going to happen. Again, the term 70 by 7 is quite interesting. We see actually this term used again for forgiveness and not to avenge. So Lamech is using 70 times 7 to say, I will be avenged this much. Jesus says, forgive that much. And so we get this idea that 70 times 7 means limitless, is kind of the idea. Limitless vengeance is what Lamech says if someone kills me. And Jesus says, no, limitless forgiveness. And so we see that same pattern. We also see 70 times 7 come up in the prophecy of Daniel as a timeline of redemption and judgment, that Christ came after 69 times 70 years in that prophecy. But that 70 times 7 is that limit, is that whole completion of redemption and judgment time frame. And so again, this idea of 70 times 7 comes up quite a few times. I believe Israel was put into exile for 70 years, right off of the Daniel prophecy. He'd been in exile for 70 years, but the idea of anything becoming multiplied means that it was even worse. Okay, so at this very low point in the book, it continues down the slope of sin. And so again, what happens now? We're going to move from the story of Cain and how bad things got, right? With Lamech being the 6th generation, sin really being like fully shown. Then we're going to come back in the story now to Adam and Eve and what's going on with them. Now that Abel's died, Cain is in exile. What do you do? And so in verse 25, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So again, we just see that Seth is going to be of the other line. Cain sets up a city and a lineage, but he's not of the genealogy of the seed. Seth will be. So it's really important for Adam and Eve to continue. She's had a seed promised to her, or seeds promised to her. And right now it's a very broken family situation. We'll see that God is going to choose this seed line, and many times it's not the firstborn, or some of the older people will get in lots of trouble and they will no longer be the one of that line. So Seth's line is different. They call in the name of the Lord, and we're going to see that contrast between Cain's line and Seth's line, which means they acknowledge Yahweh as God. There are many people in the Old Testament that do this. There's people that worship God at his altar. There's people that ask God for deliverance. There's many people that acknowledge and call upon the name of the Lord. So this is not an unusual phrase. This is kind of a normal phrase for people that are worshiping God. It's known for worship. This whole line is going to be known for walking and calling on the name of the Lord. From this line is going to be Noah and all of the things that are going to come out of that, because they're known for worshiping God. And the other line was known for civilization and these great achievements of man, but they're all going to die in the flood. And so again, by the 6th generation, we're going to see this peak of Seth's generation come into Enoch, where Enoch is going to walk with the Lord. And we're going to see by the 9th generation, Noah will be the sole prophet preacher on earth, the one displaying God the most, that's spared in the ark. And so we're going to see amazing things come from this line. Okay, so that is the end of Genesis 4. It's really this contrast of sin and what it means to walk with the Lord and call on the name of the Lord. And there's a big difference there between people that are looking to the Lord, right, and those who aren't. And that's kind of what we see in this first set of genealogies. And now we're going to jump into Seth's line. Really, Cain's line is not going to be talked about anymore. They're kind of going to just disappear from the storyline. We're going to have the flood. Things are going to restart out of Seth's line. And Cain kind of is just this little bit of history of showing how bad sin is. So in verse 1 of Genesis 5, this is a book of the generations of Adam. Again, we're starting with this Toledot statement, the generation statement. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. And thus all the days of Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Okay, so this is a major section change again. We're looking at the 10 generations in this next set of verses. It's going to take us about 4 chapters to cover these generations of Adam through Seth. And Cain gets this little few verses, but Seth's going to get the next, like I said, 4 or 5 chapters. So we're going to be narrating the 10 generations between Adam and Noah. And it's going to be not just their genealogy, but all the narrations and the narratives of their storyline and how this works. And so really, God ends up talking a lot about the people that walk with him and follow him, a lot more than the people that don't. We're reminded that people are made in the likeness of God in this section, that they're made in his image, and they're blessed. God's the one that named, and the man, Adam, he's the father. And so we see that just reiterated here. God made Adam. God is the one and is shown as good father by naming and blessing his son. Right? It shows his authority over all humankind by doing this to the first man. Even in the midst of human sin, God is still showing himself as good and gracious here. He's kind of, it is what the writer is displaying. Adam then in the same way becomes a father to his sons, but still God is father to them all. And so we just see this all being highlighted. The other thing to note here is these ages are really large for our modern brain, right? We're looking at Adam having children when he's 100, or he's living to 900. Again, many people have looked into this. The ages are actually different in different translations, ancient translations between the Hebrew and the Greek text. And we see that, again, the Mesopotamian and the Sumerian kings recorded in other extra-biblical texts have similar age ranges. So again, this is supposed to be historical narrative. We're not chopping these ages down. Again, every time people try to, things don't scale well. Like if you divide by 100 and they're living 90, or divide by 10, they're living 90 years and they're having their children at 10, that doesn't really make sense. So again, there's no real reasons not to read these ages as real. Other ideas of younger ages usually fall apart. I've read a number of commentaries. Again, the conditions of Earth and their diet and their genetics were different. I know that even today people are studying what can we do with genetics to make people live longer, and they go, there's a possibility that there's some things in genetics and things. So living in a very different climate, a different type of earth, different food sources, different genetics, very early on in the genetics. So maybe not the same kind of viruses and genetic mutations and decoding issues and things in their genetic lines. So again, as we see that, we can't really make judgments on what we understand today as age back then. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to read little bits of this genealogy. I like the genealogies, especially here, because they're so interesting. They have the years and how long they lived. And so they're going to all follow the same form. So-and-so lived a specific amount of years, and that's the age when he fathered so-and-so. And then he lived after that another X amount of years. He had other sons and daughters, thus were the days. He lived 912 years, and he died, right? We're going to have this very formulaic. Almost all of these are having children between 65 and 200 years old. So not really at all in our normal, what we think of as age scale for having children. And they're all living 900 years. And so it's quite amazing. And then all of a sudden in generation 6, so if you have the notes at all, you'll see that the generations, I kind of noted some things. There's nothing specific that stands out in most of these generations until we get to generation 6. And it says in verse 21, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God. He was not, for God took him. And so again, every other part of the genealogy ended with he died, except for Enoch's. He was walking with God and he took him. And he is taken very young at 365. Everyone else is living like double, almost triple that in time. And so it really stands out. And this is the only genealogy that includes the phrase that somebody died and they died and they died, because they want this to stand out that Enoch is not dying. He is taken. Again, he was taken, but there's no clear specification where. Most people have some idea that he was taken to be with God or in heaven, those kinds of things. Later non-biblical books, again, they're not always accurate, but they sometimes give us a little view of what the people of that time period were thinking. We'll attribute Enoch as a source of revelation and apocalyptic vision. He walked with God. He knew things of God. They were friends. They spoke, those kinds of ideas. Again, we'll see this same idea of walking with God used for Noah and Abraham and Isaac, that they also walked with God. Enoch is rescued from death, and then Noah is also going to be rescued from death by the flood. And so we see this kind of thing going on here in this lineage that's a little different. And walking with God is going to be the idea of a way to life. It's not just keeping laws. It's really about being in that relationship with God. Brings long life. Okay, and so now we're going to come into an interesting person. And this is Methuselah in the same line. This is genealogy part 7 from Seth. And again, from this line. And we're not seeing the same murder and polygamy and things come up, right, in this line. That's not what's being highlighted. I'm not saying those things aren't happening, but even the people, they're just being glossed over. A few of them are being highlighted. Enoch is the 6th generation, right, being compared against Lamech, the murderer, in the other line. And now we have Enoch walking with God and being taken. He's kind of this picture of godliness. And then we come into the 7th generation, and Methuselah is the oldest person recorded ever, 969 years. And this has some great significance just because of what they would have understood about Methuselah. He has a special name. So when Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 696 years, and he died. So stepping back for a second, Methuselah has the longest life. If we do a little bit of math, we get that when he was 187, right, he has Lamech. And when he's 369 years old, Noah's born, his grandson. And so we know that the flood starts when Noah is 600. So if Noah was born when he's 369 and Noah is 600 years old when the flood starts, that means the year that Methuselah died is the exact time when the flood comes. So we have two options. Either Methuselah died in the flood, or Methuselah died right before the flood. We know that he outlived his son Lamech by 5 years. So Lamech dies 5 years before the flood. And Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, is still living right up until the time of the flood. Methuselah's name meant when he dies, judgment comes. So it is understood that Methuselah died shortly before the flood came, kind of as a signifier that the flood was going to start, that God's judgment was going to come, right? Judgment comes when he dies. This great age, and the longest age being recorded, is to show God's great grace, that he's saying the minute Methuselah is born, judgment's coming. His name gives that. And then he gives this man incredibly long life to extend that time of judgment for 969 years before it actually comes. And so right as Methuselah dies in that year, the flood begins. And so Noah, then being his grandson, lives on. And so we're going to step into verse 28 and just talk a little bit now about Noah and his name meaning. So in verse 28, when Lamech had lived 182, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. So again, Lamech dies a few years before the flood. That's not really the point of his story. The point is that he has this son named Noah, who is being given a significant name, right? We're going to stop the narrative. We're going to give this name. It says, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring forth relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Now, this is the hope of Lamech. This doesn't mean this is a prophetic word from God. This means this is what Lamech wants. He wants this hard life, this hard toil. He's saying something. It's really hard to bring forth food right now. We don't know what was going on. We don't know if there was famines or if they were enslaved of some sort. Like, we don't get the sense, but he's making a sense that there is painful toil of their hands right now for food. And it's difficult. And he's hoping that Noah is coming forth, and he's naming him in such a way that Noah will have something to do with dealing with this. Again, it's a significant meaning of hope by his father that things are going to change because of this child. Somehow Noah is going to reverse part of the curse, go back to that blessed state where food was easier. And that's not exactly what's going to happen with the flood. But again, in Genesis 8:21, God does say, never again will I curse the ground because of man. This is after Noah's sacrifice after the flood. So it may not just be the flood narrative that Noah is saved through, but it's also the sacrifice he makes afterwards that gets this attention of, again, this curse on the land that's so difficult for them at this point. Again, like I said, we may not understand that. I know in our day and age, we plant a kernel of corn and you get 100 pieces of corn off of it. That may not have been the case. Maybe you get 5 kernels. I don't know. Like, there's certain things that maybe weren't as cultivated. They weren't as genetically modified, right? Things, or they might have had to do hand irrigation or different things. We just don't know. We also don't know how wild wildlife was at that time. And so it's important. We see in Noah's life that this lineage is really looking to the judgment of God to come. They understand it's coming, and that Noah is somehow going to be a part of this story now, and we know how it's going to go. And then we have just kind of the ending of this, that Noah, in the 9th and 10th generation, we just need to kind of finish it off to get to 10 generations. So Noah is 500 years old, and Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So we have that kind of ending this 10 generations. Shem, Ham, and Japheth would have been about 100 years old when the floods came. Because Noah was 600, he had them when he was 500. So he was very old when he had these children. I also think that might have been kind of a benefit. As far as back then, that would have been kind of towards the younger age. That's when the people started first fathering children. So they wouldn't have necessarily had children yet, right? They wouldn't have because of this. And so he's waited. He hasn't had children until he's 500. And now he has these 3 sons. They're at the age to get married, but not at the age yet to have had children. And so we see this as kind of where we are in the story. We have 10 generations now being set up. The blessings of multiplication is working. And then I'm just going to take a minute to talk a little bit about the different texts here and these ages, because I think it's important to get a little bit of an idea. So we have the Hebrew Masoretic text that's typically used by Catholics and Protestants. We go back to the original Hebrew, right, when we talk about the Old Testament. But there's also the Greek Septuagint, which was a translation of the Hebrew. And it was translated in the 4th or 5th century BC, so about 400 or 500 years before Jesus. And this Greek translation is what the Gospels use pretty heavily, and probably Jesus was using to talk to that audience, because most of them spoke Greek. And so we just see that we have two versions then of the Bible that are actually considered authoritative, because they're, the Greek version is quoted by Jesus and the Hebrew version is the original. And so again, we don't have the original tablets or anything like that, but we do see that those two versions don't agree on the genealogies. They actually don't agree quite a bit. The genealogies and the ages tend to be quite different. And so again, when they have children is changed in one of the texts. The Septuagint gives much longer life. So the Greek version that Jesus and the disciples would have been quoting from, and they give much older ages. Numerical copy errors are quite difficult to catch in numbers. So, if you leave a number out of a number series, it's very hard to tell because there's no grammar in that word. So a later scribe can't tell, they left the 5 out of 155. Is it 155 or is it 15? Like, I can't really tell. But if I leave a letter out of a word, like the word cat, you just have a C and a T, the A is missing. But with numbers, it doesn't work that way. And so it's very hard to tell. So there's some issues there. There is those discrepancies. And so it's a little hard to tell how long these genealogies are. It's also a little hard to know who was living while the other person died, those kinds of things. Like I said, we do know Methuselah died right before the flood, kind of as that kind of sign of God's grace. But again, there's some ideas like it may be that Abraham would have died around 2123, or he could have died around 3589 BC. So that's a big difference for such a short time frame to have those kind of discrepancies. So we don't always know. Again, there's some verses in the New Testament that says we're not supposed to argue over the exact meaning of words or over genealogies and numbers like this. So while the Bible is authoritative for our lives, sometimes these issues do come up between the two different Hebrew and the Greek text. There are things that aren't translated exactly like some of the people from the Hebrew think it should be. Like Hebrew scholars would be like, why did they translate it that way in the Greek? But yet then in the New Testament, they quote it that way. So again, just dealing with these things carefully. There are certain things we just can't know, but we do get some general sense that people were living a really long time back there. Both of the versions give them very long lifespans. It's more of when they had children, not how long they lived. Okay, so I just want to make sure that was really clear that as we look at these different texts. And now we're going to get into Genesis 6. And if it hadn't been bad enough in Cain's line, we're going to really descend into sin here. So again, verse 1, when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Okay. So I read all this together because it's one narrative piece about what's going on. Sin is proliferating, right? There's things that are going on. The narrative is slim on details. There's probably more questions than answers in this one. Again, our modern audience, we can't know what's going on. The whole point, let's just make sure we understand the main point. It's not good. It's sin. Sin is increasing, and that's the point. Now, we can start talking about all the other details. I know people write papers and books and all this, and they get super into it. Again, I think sometimes we miss the point of what we're looking at. We have this good God who made everything perfect, and humanity is frail, faulty, and sinful. And so again, first we start with individual sin with Adam and Eve, then it becomes family sin with Cain's line, and now it's society corruption. So we're just seeing this even wider expansion of sin. And the problem here is the life and the king's reigns need to be shortened. Just in general, having people that are living this long isn't working. And God basically says this. So there's two sets of words here that need to be kind of carefully looked at. I'm going to give some options. I'm not going to give answers because, again, who are these Nephilim? there's a number of things. You can pull out any commentary you want and get a couple commentaries. They might have different opinions on this, but they typically lay out the same options. This idea of Nephilim is also used in Numbers 13:33 to describe the inhabitants of the land of Canaan at the time of the conquest. So it could have been humans at that point or something. So again, this word isn't terribly clear, but we have that in the Nephilim, number one, they could be angelic beings, meaning demonic beings that had fallen. The Hebrew word is really close to the word fallen ones for Nephilim. The second option is that in Numbers 13:33, it's given by the spies about the descendants of Anak who were considerable in size, so giants. So some believe Nephilim were giants. And the third option is that they were just humans that were warriors and heroes of old. And so those are kind of your choices. They could be demons, they could be giants of some kind of mix of human demonic being, or they could just be humans. Again, it's not 100% clear because it's just kind of mentioned in passing. But 2 Peter 2:4 gives a little bit more insight. A lot of people connect to this. And Jude 6 also, write of angels that are held in chains or pits in darkness reserved for judgment because they left their proper abode. Jude says the angels did acts of porneia. It's kind of like Sodom and Gomorrah got in trouble for. But in Genesis 6, they take women as wives. And so this is not terribly clear what's going on. So it says here in Genesis 6 that these Nephilim were earth, and they came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. And so again, this idea is the problem with this verse, and the sin could be that demons are actually wives with women, so marrying women, or it could be the same thing as what Jude's writing about, that they're doing acts of porneia, or like Sodom and Gomorrah, sexual sin with humans. But in Genesis 6 here, it says that these take women as wives. Again, that might be, different kinds of sexual sin, or it could just mean that they're having children with them. Again, it's not usually the case that we talk about demons marrying women as wives, but again, this is a very unusual time. And we also find that if this is the case, that they are demonic forces, that they were held in chains from this time. At the time of the flood, God puts them in chains in a pit of darkness, reserved for final judgment, because they were so out of control that God couldn't allow this to happen again. And so this could be a terrible, terrible time of what's going on here, if you think that demons are crossing those physical lines with people. So again, that's the Nephilim. There's also this term sons of God, and there's a few options for those. Again, one option is this is kind of talking about the same thing, the fallen angels. Historically, these were always thought to be angelic beings. The sons of God in other places in the Old Testament means angels. And Matthew 22:30 says angels cannot marry. But again, this is not maybe wives and marrying in the sense that we would have, but in a really bad way. So, because some people say that, angels can't marry, so therefore, because these are wives, they can't be angelic beings or fallen angels. Again, I think that possibly here, these could be fallen angels, and historically, that's typically what they've been interpreted to be, and that 2 Peter and Jude are addressing that this was really out of control situation. The other option is that these sons of God are royalty. In the 3rd century AD, some commentators picked up this idea that these were human kings. They were royal. The sons of God, we like to use some of the older material, though, like Epic of Gilgamesh, just to look at the way the ancient audience would have seen this. Sometimes he talks about the king in his time that's immoral and takes women. So this idea of what was going on at that time, we can kind of get from these other legends and stories. Obviously, the Epic of Gilgamesh is more in the category of legend and fable, but it kind of gives us a little bit of idea around some of these same storylines and their thinking at that time, that a lot of times these kings or these demigods are set up as ones who are really immoral and taking women. They feel like that's their prerogative to take any women they want. And he's also described as a son of God, being 2/3 God and human king. So this idea of a mixing of God and human has kind of been there, and he's very tall and a giant. And so again, in the Epic of Gilgamesh at the same time period, this bad king that's part God and demigod, and very tall like a giant, needs his age shortened so he doesn't reign as long because he's a terrible, terrible person or being. The other option is that it's not just kings or human kings, that this is actually the line of Seth being the sons of God, and Seth wasn't supposed to be marrying the line of Cain, but that doesn't completely make sense because nowhere else does that really line up. So that one I think is a little less, maybe a human king being the sons of God, but more than likely it's typically fallen angels that would be described here. Again, the question has to answer, why wouldn't Seth and Cain's line be allowed to intermarry? There's no real reason to believe that or anything. So again, we just see, and then the other things in this passage that come up is, why is 120 years? Are their lifespans being shortened, or is that the time until the flood? We'll see quite a few of the patriarchs live more than 120 years, but ages will drastically decrease as time goes on. Maybe again, these long lives of the early people may have been a blessing, but again, that's not going to be available after the flood. So lives are going to get shortened a lot, and the hope is that sin won't be able to propagate as far. And so wickedness is thoroughly entrenched now, not just in individuals or families, but in all of society. And so we see that in verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heaven, for I am sorry that I've made them. So again, we see that God sees, he saw in this, and it's time for judgment. And he's seeing that things are not good. Actually, he's very grieved by what he's seeing. The Lord's grieved over sin, and it's this idea of anguish. So not only are humans having anguish because of what happened, right? She's going to have anguish in pregnancy and childbirth, but now God is. He's in pain over this. And we see maximal words being used, every, only, continually, extreme words to explain what's going on. All their thoughts, right? Every intention and thought of their heart was only evil continually. Like, that's all they were doing all day long, right? We kind of get this from the Epic of Gilgamesh, kind of displaying the same thing. The kings were going out and taking any women they wanted, and people are abusing each other. Like, we need to stop and think about sin not just affecting us and our own personal hearts and what we do, but also what's done to us. And that's really what comes up as we look at this. It's not just about their personal actions, which it definitely is, but it's also that they're being abused. They're abusing each other. They're hurting one another, and nothing's working anymore. This is completely the epitome of the degradation of society. The world was probably a harsh, hostile place with the land curse. They needed to toil to eat. They needed to cultivate things. It was much harder to grow and less fruitful. You get the sense that things were not easy. The animals might have been growing extra large with all this extended lifespan, right? We even see in the fossil record these large giant insects, dinosaurs, other things. Like, we don't even understand maybe how hostile the world is at this point. And that is partly like in this, God is saying he needs to take care of all of man and all the creepy things, the created animals, everything's going to get wiped out. And we don't quite get the sense of why the animals are coming under judgment. Was there something wrong with them? Were they supposed to be vegetarians? What's going on? Like, we get the sense that especially when he first made them, they were all going to be vegetarians. Like, I always ask the question, why do they have such big teeth then, or venom, or those kinds of things? Did that come in later? Like, what is going on here with everything that's alive, that this all needs to get a restart? And so we see that that's really going to be the plan of God and what's going to have to happen here, because sin is so pervasive. So in verse 8, we see, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous and blameless in his generations. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. So why is Noah going to be chosen to save humanity? Why was no one else? Because he was righteous. And that's the whole point of this chapter, is not to explain like anything else other than, look, God is going to be gracious to one person. He's going to pick Noah out. Noah is going to be righteous and blameless, and he's going to listen to God and follow his ways. He's going to be the exception to all the other humans, and in that, he's going to see his family get saved. He could be trusted with the plans to build the ark. We don't know if anybody else was invited into that. We don't know at all. Like, all we know is God tells Noah, do this, and the 8 of you are going to get saved. It doesn't sound like it's an open invitation. It doesn't sound like Noah's going around. to give out tickets to the ark or anything like that. Again, we don't know. I know there's lots of movies and videos and different takes on this, and but again, coming back just to what Scripture says, what we do know is Noah's righteous, which means that righteousness, the other word for that is just or justice. So the idea is he's being just to others. He's not murdering, those kinds of things. We only hear one wife here, those kinds of things that we're implying into the text sometimes. But he also is blameless, which means he's wholehearted before God. So he's not just right with people, he's also right with God. And it doesn't, and we know from other places that to be righteous, no one's fully righteous on their own. But for him, he was righteous and blameless in his generation compared to everything else going on. Noah was listening to God, and he was staying faithful to him. And it's really going to be God's grace that's seen through this. So don't ever think that righteousness was an earned thing. It was still by God's grace. Noah was the only one in his generation. The rest of them are going to pass into corruption. I mean, can you imagine at that time period? We think it's hard in our lives to stay right with God, but he has no godly friends. He has no mentors. Well, he probably did. He probably has his grandfather and his father who died shortly before the flood. But he had no church, no good sermons, no worship bands, no Bible, no conferences, nothing to go to get refreshed and refilled, anything that we talk about to keep him going. We don't know anything about his wife and children, if they were doing well or not. But we do just see here that Noah is able to carry this on. Okay. And that in this, he gets to see 7 people go with him. We'll see that again in other stories like Rahab or Lot. There's people that get saved because of somebody else's righteousness or prayers. And so Noah is one of those people. And so as we jump into the next set of texts, I think we'll stop here and we'll jump into the entire story in the next one. So I think that Noah's life is an important part of this whole story, just because of who he is in his righteousness and faithfulness to God. And this is really where the story starts to change, right? We're going to have the sin, but then we're going to have this other piece of godliness show up.